Tell me when we are
Yep,
live.
we're live.
And we are live. Today we have, for your viewing pleasure or listening pleasure, a lot of you been talking. You say, like, I'm an atheist and I'm totally obsessed with Matt Dillahunty. I want to be Matt Dillahunty. And others of you are like, I want to be Paula Gia. Well, those are like yesterday's atheists. Those are like dinosaur atheists from the old school. Today we have the new school of atheism. We have like tomorrow's atheist today. The guy, you'll listen to this guy and you'll be like, Paula Gia, who? Matt Dillahunty, who? Who cares about those guys anymore? Has-beens, atheists from yesterday, dinosaur atheists. Welcome, please. Pleasure of Dow. Woo! Pleasure of Dow. Oh my God.
It's hard to live up to that intro though.
he's as cool as Deconverted Man. Yes, he's as cool as Deconverted Man. And it's just as smooth with the ladies, but unlike right. Deconverted Man, he won't own it. He'll like go, oh shucks, no, can't be me.
Yeah. Sounds good. I'm not sure if my ex-wife agrees.
Oh snap, ex-wife. Oof. There's probably a story there. So we want to introduce yourself to the to the congregation.
Sure. My name. Well, I go by Pleasure of Doubt, or you can call me Brett. I answer to either. And sorry, my glasses are fogging up for some reason. Right after I get out of the shower, they fog up for a bit, so that should calm down after a bit. I am. I guess I usually call myself a non-theist because I used to go by atheist, or I've gone by agnostic, but I got a little sick of all the arguments over the definition of atheism debates. So I just generally these days just call myself a non-theist, but you could call me, I fit under the agnostic atheist, the weak atheist, or agnostic. My general position on God is that I don't think there's sufficient reliable evidence to believe that God exists, but I also don't believe there's sufficient reliable evidence to believe that no deities exist. So however you want to classify me, I don't really care. But that,
well, you probably, let me just ask if you're kind of an atheist the way a lot of atheists are, but you kind of trying to sidestep the tribal identity. Is that what I'm hearing? You don't want to be in the like, I'm like Paula Gia. I'm like one of the people in the debate or in the fight necessarily. Well, is that fair to say?
Well, it's more that these arguments.
You don't believe in any God.
No, I don't believe in any God. So I mean, I always, for the longest time, I thought of myself as an atheist, in the weak atheist versus strong atheist. So weak atheist being the lack of belief atheist, or the lack theist, that I lack a belief in any deities, but I don't believe no deities exist. And as my thoughts have grown, I just think we can't have sufficient evidence that no deities exist, because a deity could exist and just not provide us with the evidence to allow us to have a confident conclusion that they exist. So I'm not willing to say, but if I had to lean somewhere, I lean more towards the atheist side, definitely. I'm more open, I guess, as the years have gone on. I'm more open probably to the prospect of a deity, but I'm still pretty far from being convinced that any deity exists. But I think there's there's enough tantalizing evidence and experiences out there that leave the question open. I'm not willing to say that it's a question.
Well, having interacted with you a few times, and I'm in a group with this person that I'm talking to on his channel. Is it on Beverly? Where's this group we're in?
Yeah,
I should say I lead a group. I'm kind of the leader. That might be news to these guys, but I'm kind of the leader of the group. What channel is it on? It's on Beverly, right? Or is it on?
Yeah, on the at Beverly, the Beverly Me. Well, actually no, it's at Beverly.me. At Beverly Me is the Twitter, and the YouTube is Beverly. And actually, John Buck, who's producing your show and on right now. Actually, that's how we met. We met on Twitter, and he brought me into Beverly, and sort of it's a community where they were one thing they do is bring together people with different views to talk with each other in a productive way, to sort of support each other, mutually support each other. So it's a nice little community, and we've been going through John Vervecchi's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis YouTube series, which is a fantastic series for.
Yeah, which is totally excellent. Yeah, well, one thing I noticed about you from that is that you're a lot more open-ended and a lot more willing to have open-ended philosophical conversations than your typical atheist, whether that's because you don't necessarily identify with the tribal, or you're just in general a kind of an easygoing, easy to talk to person, or you just roll that way. You just don't mind metaphysical speculation. You kind of, you're willing to entertain possibilities and have more open-ended conversation about symbolic realities and things like that than a lot of. There are others, but you definitely are noteworthy for that. And
Well, thank you,
say,
and that's something that I've worked on over the years. I mean, so I like to think of myself as a skeptic in the sense of, when it comes to important issues, I want to withhold belief absent sufficient reliable evidence. But part of that means being open to the evidence and being open to new evidence and being open to be convinced. I think on those important beliefs, I should always be open to the fact that my beliefs could be wrong, and open to other possibilities. Now, that doesn't mean, so I'm very open to having conversations. I have my biases just like everyone else, and sort of fighting bias, and particular our tribal bias, is one thing I've, at least on a personal project, I've been working on for a really long time. Basically, I think we have these inbuilt tribal biases. So the us versus them, the in-group preference, where we have an affinity towards our in-group, and we have a distrust, a natural distrust towards the out-group. And it stems, no doubt, back from our time when we were back in tribes, and even before
right,
that.
when the out group was actually literally dangerous. The out group, if a group of Christians came to a group of atheists on the savannah, we either kill you or you kill us. So that's right. Let's have a conversation, guys. We either end you or you guys would end us.
Yeah,
but God would help us, so we'd end you. But I want to, before we go into this, I want to find out more about your background, because nobody on our channel knows you so far. Sure. I'm assuming you're going to make a few appearances from this point forward, but as of this hearing, nobody knows anything about you. So was there a deconversion process? I know you're Jewish. Culturally, maybe that's about all I know.
Yeah, my background is Jewish. I basically lost my belief in God. I mean, I can remember a time when I did believe in God. I can remember clearly. I remember as a kid having nightmares, and one technique I'd use to try to have the nightmares go away is to pray to God before I went to sleep, to not have nightmares. And so I have those early memories. And yeah, my family's Reformed Jewish, so my family's was never all that religious. They're more culturally, I guess, Jewish than anything. We went to synagogue on the high holidays and for weddings and funerals, but really, we had family events. So, at the important holidays, we do a Passover Seder, and we do, we celebrate the high holidays, but not a terribly religious family. But
right, yeah, I knew. Where did you grow up? What area of the country?
I grew up in Toronto.
Okay, because I grew up in New York, Westchester County, and about half my friends were basically what you described, culturally Jewish. They went to like Hebrew school. Matter of fact, my friends were called the Jew crew. Literally about seven out of 12 of them were Jewish, and I went to like all these bar mitzvahs in like 7th and 8th grade, and they went to Hebrew school, and they were big cultural Jews, but they had no. They weren't atheists necessarily, but they were totally secular,
Yeah, so I went to Hebrew school a couple times a week after school. So it was just an after school program where they teach you the basics. And then on Sunday we had religious school, it was called, where they teach you the stories from the Old Testament. And I gradually just found myself, and I don't recall any pressure from anyone. I mean, I never talked about it, I think, much with my parents, but I found myself gradually just not buying the stories I was being taught. And I can recall that, and my belief in God sort of trickled away. But I can't say it was all that. I mean, I was 11 or 12. I know by 12 for sure I had lost my belief, because I'd had a deal with my parents that I could stop going to Hebrew religious school after my bar mitzvah. So they made me stay until then, but after that they would give me the choice. So I know by 12 I had lost it. So it was around 11 or 12 and it just sort of went away. But I can't say at that point that it was particularly sophisticated. I just didn't buy the stories and
Right.
eventually just realized, okay, I don't believe them and by consequence don't believe in God. Sort of later on, sort of in university and post university is when I started, thinking about it a lot more. So I think, so while my belief has never come back, I think I've looked into it a lot more since my childhood, I guess, deconversion story. But so it drifted away.
Right. Because when I was growing up, we were technically Roman Catholic, but nobody in my family expected me or my sisters to actually believe. It was weird. My father did actually kind of believe in God, and he went to church every Sunday. My mother, she would describe herself as an agnostic. If there was such a thing as atheism back then, she probably would have become an atheist because she was really anti-clerical and she's very liberal. So she probably would have gravitated a lot of the stuff they said she would like. So now you're in college, or take us to where we're at. You're in college and you're.
My son just jumped in for a second. Wait, just one second. It's gonna mute.
Sure, go for it.
Aww.
He did that on purpose to make the audience.
He's doing this on purpose. Yeah, he
totally did that. He's totally scamming He's scamming you right now.
Everybody, all right, give a smile for
everybody's
everyone.
Like he wanted to.
I'm back letters.
Okay, all right. Close the door.
Because now he thinks we won't barbecue him because we're like, oh, he's a good family man.
Right. And,
forget it.
Once
he
realized, he's funny. He's cute. That's my youngest son.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, but no, I mean, in universities, it's like everything I did. Undergrad, I did political science, history, and with a philosophy minor. And I took philosophy of religion course. I took later on. I took a law of the Old Testament course. So I was interested in the philosophy of religion, but post university, when I was in university, it was sort of the internet was sort of just getting going. When I was a kid and growing up, the internet was just getting going, and post university is when really
what was it, AOL
internet
dial-up? Are we talking about that?
Oh, I was on. I remember being on they were BBSs, these bulletin board services, where it was sort of on. It was almost like a DOS screen, and it was. It was the early days of the internet.
I was telling people in the 90s I was on the internet, and I was telling everybody where I worked, like, this thing, the internet, is going to be unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I was like the only one who'd been on it. Everyone was skeptical. See, everyone was skeptical.
Yeah. And back I remember the day where Hello Jeeves was like the search engine, and I've been there since the beginning. But but in my post-university days, I guess, is when really internet forums started. So I got on to I've been on sort of forums since then, and having numerous debates in terms of basic from. I spent a long time having theist debates. And I got into a little bit of the parapsychology, sort of the skeptic versus believer of whether things like ESP and telekinesis and that type of thing exist, and the science of parapsychology, and examining that for a few years, and then eventually came to Twitter, and I was on Twitter for a while before I actually really started getting into it, and now the last few years getting on in Twitter, but I've had many of these discussions between theists and atheists, and I guess I always found myself in the role of sort of a mediator, of trying to bring the sides together. So over the years, I've really put a focus on that of trying to have good discussions, figuring out how to have good discussions, seeing all the different ways that these discussions between these different groups go bad, and trying to figure out ways and managing throughout this to have good discussions even when other people are sometimes having bad discussions, and sort of figuring out the ways. So now I don't know if you want I'll stop now.
No, that's
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
really interesting. I didn't realize that
Mm.
that was like a thing of yours. That's one of your pet interests in this little niche industry or niche thing that we're in. So what, before we go into the other stuff, what are your pet theories as to why these discussions go bad?
Well, tribalism is the big one. It's the us versus them. It's this inherent distrust that we have towards the other groups. Like we said way back when, the other group, the other, whoever you identify, the other really were trying to kill you or steal your stuff or
Right.
rape your women or whatnot. They really were a danger. And honestly, there are times even today where the other is trying to do that. There are places in the world that are very dangerous. But the thing is, our those same instincts, those same inbuilt biases still kick in, even when it's just arguing with someone who has a different point of view, when they're not really an existential threat to you. And what I think it does is it puts a filter over everything each side says. And what I would start noticing is that each side was looking at the other in almost the exact same way. If you just took out the language, so non-theists tend to be use a little more crass language, say, than theists, for example. But if you sort of translated, each side would think the other side was in bad faith. Each side thought they were the ones standing up for the good, the right, the just, you know, talking the hard truth to the other side.
So
And
what's different about you that you can cut through that? If you had to just, I realize that's a challenging question. You might not have thought about it, but if
no,
you had to take
no, I
a
have.
guess.
I think. Well, first of all, I think my mom said I was always the devil's advocate, even as a kid. So when I have always instinctively, and I guess my father, he was a lawyer, and he sort of taught me how to argue, and we would argue a lot and debate a lot. So and actually after. I don't practice now, but I was a lawyer for a while too, for
Oh, you
10
were?
years. I went
Oh,
to law
cool.
school. So so for example, in my university training, in my BA, I don't know how it is today, but in my day, you had to give each side of an argument to get a good grade. You weren't, if you only put forward your argument without looking at your weaknesses, you would you would probably get a C on a paper. In law school, especially, they would construct these assignments and these exams where you could get an A arguing for either side, and they would sometimes just assign you to either side.
Aside, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
They
so
do
I
that, and they do that in debating squads
yeah
and things like that, where you have to
yes.
switch sides. And go ahead.
So I think one thing I've had is a lot of training in being the devil's advocate, and I've tried to I've had a lot of training in looking at the flaws in my argument, and looking at the flaws in other people's arguments and trying to construct and find the best route forward. But I think probably there's just something in my disposition. I know even back in the day, I've always tried to look for the sort of middle ground, so to speak, the compromise position that doesn't necessarily make everybody happy, but is something everyone can live with. So I think
Do
there's
you do
always
that
been.
with politics too? Just curious.
Yeah. Like I consider myself center left, so I'm not a radical. But, I think the market. I like the market, but I like a social safety net. Right? So
Right.
I like
A
democracy,
Clinton Democrat.
but probably if I was in the States. So here in Canada, I'm a liberal. Right. So I'm fairly modern, and but I also, I mean, in university, my focus, one of my focuses in history was the French Revolution, and I could see, I studied a lot of the revolutions back in my undergrad, and I would see, you know, the cases where a huge revolution, a bloody revolution happened, they usually ended up with something worse than what they started. So the French Revolution ended up with Napoleon. But you look at
Right.
the quiet revolution of the British Revolution, which was more evolutionary. They call it the
Right.
bloodless revolution.
The Orange, wasn't it the Orange Revolution? William of Orange
Yeah.
in
Uh, you know,
1600s, where they
you may remember the details even better than I don't remember a lot of the nitty gritty of it, but
English Revolution was more like and we came from the English system, but it was more of a gradual transition from a monarchy into a republic. But somewhere around, I think, King James I, the monarch had become a figurehead somewhere in the 1700s, and they had no actual political power. By the time you get to like
Yeah.
the late 1800s, the monarch was just a ceremonial role, and they had no power at all.
And it was a slow, gradual change. It wasn't like let's burn it all down and create a new. I mean, that
Right.
I always think with that kind of thing, if you hit your target, great. But it's so hard to hit your target, and if you miss your target when you tear it all down, then you're likely going to be ending up with something that's worse than what you started
Right.
with.
And the French Revolution, you had the Reign of Terror, led directly to the Reign of Terror and the Jacobin radicals, and it got really, really scary and crazy. And that's, even before Napoleon.
Yeah. It was terrible. They were chopping off heads left and right, and they thought they were on the side of the good and the just, just like anything. They thought they had reason. They thought they had a good reason to do it, but it led to it led to something pretty terrible. And so I tend to be a moderate, and I tend to favor discussion over revolution. So I'm on the left, but I'm never going to be a radical
bomb thrower.
leftist.
And you tend to the reason why it happens, or one of the key reasons, is that people tend to start to dehumanize their opponent. First of all, they see them as an opponent. And then they start to generalize about them and then dehumanize them. And that's where you start to see them as the enemy, which is exactly the opposite of Christ's teaching, by the way. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Go ahead.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I saw too in all these discussions, whether it's atheist and theist, whether it's even believer, non-believer, when it comes to parapsychology, people would see the other side as the enemy. And what I tried to do is put myself in the shoes of the other person, is try to say, how are they seeing it? And, if I believe what they believe, how would I see what I'm saying? And now that we'll come to Vervaeke, but that's sort of a participatory type of knowledge of interacting with the other side, where you're trying to put yourself into their shoes. And I think most of the time, so with the us versus them, my hypothesis, this is my big hypothesis, and my sort of mini project, and what I'm trying to do. My hypothesis is this: I don't think we can get rid of our us versus them tribal biases. I think evolution may one day weed it out, but for now we have them. So my idea is we can game it. The trick is to game it, to sort of trick it. So if we can start to see them more like us, our natural distrust will lower, our natural affinity will start to rise, and we'll be able to get along. So I've tried to come up with methods to help that. When you put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to see it from their perspective, it brings, I think, even that act brings you closer, and you start to realize that the other people, most people are, there are bad people in the world. I'm not naive, but most people, especially in arguments online and on the internet, are everyday normal people who want the good and seek the good, and they may not know the best way to reach it, but they're generally trying to do good. They're generally trying to advance ideas that they believe in, and they genuinely see the other side as having ideas that are dangerous, and that their job is their duty is to sort of oppose it. And when you start to see the other people more as people, when you start to realize that there's real people on the other side of the keyboard, I think you start to reduce that sense of distrust. Now that's it's not to say we suddenly start agreeing with each other. Theists and non-theists probably still disagree. Some people will switch sides and all that, and that's great. The object is not to get everybody on the same page. In fact, I think having people with different beliefs is healthy for society. It keeps things interesting. And the fact that it's very difficult for any one group to nail it, to just get the right answer across the board. So when you have different groups, you can pick and choose. You can, there are pros and cons to these different groups. And sometimes one group is a little more in power. Sometimes the other group's a little more in power. This is with the political parties, going back and forth. And it helps to, get the benefits and sort of contain the harms. So the object isn't necessarily to necessarily all agree, but to be able to live and work together, to be able to converse with each other, to be able to realize, you know what, that that non-theist isn't quite, a Satan controlled, malfeasance, and that theist isn't just trying to control everything about me and trying to just thinks I'm going to go to hell and I'm a horrible
So
person.
instead of me hating deconverted man with every fiber of my being and trying to kill him and hate him, literally hate him, I should see him as a person. You're saying? Oh,
Yeah,
it's
something to think about, isn't it?
Weird. Now, okay, let me tell you my own 2 cents on this, and then I'll let you hand you the ball back. I agree with almost everything you said. One of the things that's you may not find this very hard to believe, but I always pride myself on when I was younger and growing up is that it was really easy for me to float in and out of different groups, different cliques, and I can still do it today really easily. And just hang out with a group of people who are like even conservatives, liberals. Most of the people I know were liberal growing up, almost everybody. But it's really easy for me to pal around with conservatives. And one of the key things is there are certain key buzzwords that you can earn. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a library right down the street, Pepperdine University, and I wanted to go up there and use their computers. And the guy who was running the gate was a conservative. I could tell by just the buttons and things he was listening to. So I earned his trust just by name dropping, because my wife is a red stater. So I would just name drop like, Hannity, name drop, what's his face?
Tucker
Rush Limbaugh. Oh, right, exactly. And no, this was back about 10 years ago before he was on the air. And just by name dropping people name dropping certain people, he automatically started to think of me as one of him. And then you have, then he automatically thinks that you're on his, you don't have to agree to, I didn't say like, those people cheating the system, we got to stop. I didn't say anything to make him think that he would think that I agreed with his positions, except name drop a couple of his go-to people that I knew were his. I know conservatives because of my wife. I know well enough to name drop the real ones. You know what I'm saying? So
it made him probably feel that you understood him.
Drop his guard and make me think I'm one of him. I'm like him, even though I never said anything to make him think that. You get somebody to drop their guard and they think you're of the tribe. The tribe, even conservatives, if you actually start to analyze their beliefs, you find out they aren't all that conservative. That's what Trump proved. They aren't really as conservative as they think they are. They're just lining up with certain tribal associations. And it's the same thing on the left. A lot of them have anomalous views that they don't recognize that they have, which I'm sure you'd be aware of. Go ahead.
Sure, and most people don't fit. I mean, ideologies are useful to have a nice, to make it easier to just talk in general. You're a conservative, you're a liberal. I know roughly what you have, but we always have to push deeper. People have these idiosyncrasies, but it's also, I mean, what I'm trying to do is get people to say, I know you're of the different group. I know you have different beliefs than me, but I can still live and work with you. I can still talk with you. And part of it, I think, is like you said, when you started name dropping, he probably felt, to some extent, at least, you understood him. And a lot of the time in these discussions, people are talking.
But it's actually not fake, because I kind of do. I don't argue with my wife. My wife and I don't agree about anything, but we never argue about politics, because I always talk about, and I always talk about it in ways that we can both agree. Even though we might not agree about a whole bunch of stuff, there's areas in there that we totally agree upon. I can't think of a good example. Go ahead.
No, right. And because when I think you understand me, it makes me respond more favorably to you. But what we have a lot, I mean, on the internet especially, is people talking past one another. You have people with their talking points, and they're really talking at one another, and they're not talking with each other. They're talking at each other. So they're listening for keywords, but they're not really taking in what the other person's saying. They're not
listening at all. They're listening so that they can plug in their talking point du jour, whatever talking point they're trying to And that's even why they engage in the conversation to begin with, so that they can throw out their talking points and prove that person's wrong.
But people do this, but they're not doing this on purpose. It's not like they're going into these conversations and doing this on purpose. This is something they're doing unconsciously. And if you can break through that, so if you can sort of start first listening, you know, what I say is you can't get rid of your biases, but you can control for them. So one way to control for them is to force yourself to respond to everything the other side is saying. So this is easier in the writing ones. It's a little harder.
It's called steel manning.
Yeah. Well, not just steel manning, but what a lot of people do is, they'll ignore all the questions the other side has that they can't answer in an easy way. And then they just answer the questions they feel they have a good handle on. But if you force yourself to answer all the questions that the other person has, you force yourself, first of all, you force yourself to check your own arguments, because usually it's that cognitive dissonance that kicks in, where you get a question like, I don't want to answer that. And that's usually something saying there's either something wrong with my argument, maybe I have to change it, or there's just something I still have to figure out. I'm just not there yet. And by sort of fighting, and this is hard, you have to consciously do it. You have to say, I'm going to fight that cognitive dissonance, and I'm going to make myself answer, even if it's to say, you know what, I don't have an answer for you. I'm going to have to think about that more. But hopefully you could even go farther than that. And when the other side sees you engaging with them, again, it lowers that sense of distrust, because they say, you know what, they hear me. And even what I try to do is I try to say, I hear what you're saying. I think just even saying, I hear what you're saying, letting the person know that you're listening and that you're really trying to understand them, lessens that sense of distrust, because so often people don't feel like they're heard, and they feel, and they're talking past one another. Often they're using the same words but meaning different things and not even realizing it. And so in sort of forcing yourself to listen to them, to try to ask yourself, if I had the beliefs of the other person, how would they react to what I'm saying? If I had the beliefs of the other person, how would they see me? And if you can get into that, you can start reducing those that distrust and actually having a back and forth discussion. And then what people I find is they're surprised that, I've had people tell me, this is the first time I've had a really good productive discussion on the internet, and they're kind of delighted. Because,
with an atheist or just in general?
Well, in general, I've had it from theists. I've had it in politics, or I've had conservatives. I've had other atheists, and I've had the opposite. I've had some people really don't like doing this, and they are really invested. I had one day, this happened twice. One day where a theist and a atheist in same 24-hour period blocked me on Twitter because I was trying to help them see, the other sides, trying to be productive with the other side.
I don't want to see the other side.
Yeah, and
do goody good. Get out of here.
Once I had the same thing in a 24-hour period, someone on the left, on the extreme left and the extreme right blocked me as well for the same type of reason. So I've had great discussions where people say, hey, at the end, hey, that was great, I never had that before. And I've had other people really strongly reject it because some people are really attached.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem. And it's not a problem. I understand what you do and why you're doing it. But here's the thing to keep in mind. The reason why there's so much bad faith is that actually people are operating in the bad faith. And that's on both sides of the argument. People aren't really trying to have constructive conversations. They're trying to win they're trying to, they're Pyrrhic victories, and anybody with half a brain could tell you they're irrelevant victories, but they're trying to win something. They're trying to accomplish their team agenda, and they're not.
Okay, but hold on. Does that, everybody has an agenda and an interest, but does that equate bad faith? I define bad faith as being deliberately misleading, as deliberately trying to manipulate in a dishonest way. So how do you define bad faith here?
Is it deliberate? Is that the question? Is it deliberate?
I think
it's
bad faith has to be deliberate. It's saying
okay. Then
uh,
bad faith's the wrong word.
sure.
Semi-conscious.
Biased is the word I might use.
Right, but what you find? Oh God, this could start to get really complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole world of conversation that we could have here. It's semi-conscious. It's not bad faith to the point where I wouldn't say it's bad faith to the point where the person absolutely knows that they're scamming the other human being, but scam artistry is involved. And if the person were called upon to give an account of their behavior in the moment, they could recognize that they were being deceptive. They are capable of understanding that they're being manipulative. It's conscious enough that you could, if you could pull out of the conversation for a second and call them out, they would recognize that the error of their ways and repent.
Well, I agree with you that sometimes you can call people on it and draw it to their attention, but I think what we're seeing is much more bad faith than, say, shenanigans. That is much more bias rather than shenanigans. Like I people are biased in favor of their own position. This is natural, and we see it on both sides. But so often you have each side.
But just to make sure, we see it
on
both sides. Let me just correct you though; it's way more common on the atheists. You understand that, right? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Well, but no joke. People do think that on the theist side often, and the atheists see it more as the theists being the ones who are in bad faith. And that's part of my point. What I think you have is, most of the time, again, there are nasty sort of manipulative people who are just trying to, achieve some, that are really trying to do it for, call it nefarious ways, that they know what they're doing and they're just trying to, troll people, or they're just trying to, take advantage of people. So there are those people, but I think most of these people, and frankly, I've seen you, like I've seen even you, Craig, in discussions talk about the other side, and I say, and you describe them as bad faith, and I think, I don't know if they're in bad faith. I think they honestly.
Okay, now I was going to actually cite you specifically in a video that I might not post, but I cited you specifically. Here's the problem, and this is a real problem. Okay, when normally I'm really, really, really good at sizing up people. And I can't do it as well on Twitter and YouTube as I can in real life. But in real life, I'm absolutely fantastic at it. And I know when I'm being played. And I even know when I'm being subtly played. I can tell you in a minute flat. But for somebody to perceive it from the outside, especially I totally accept that there are tribal preconditions, and you might be right about some of your biases. Christians may behave in way X, and that's false of Christians as a general rule. I agree with that. Usually when atheists cite Christians, I tend to agree with the atheists. Yeah, Christians do that. I accept that. It's really impossible, okay, or very, very hard to perceive a conversation on Twitter will read to you like both sides are acting in good faith. You have to be on the receiving end of the behavior in order to ferret out that the person is being played. And you can't perceive it. One can't perceive from the outside.
First of all, again, I've taken part in a lot of these conversations myself, but do you think that being on the receiving end can bias you against what's being said?
Well, but let me just make sure you understand what I mean clearly, right? I think you do, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think
that it's
when you're
hard for
you get a sense of the back and forth, and you get a sense of the tactics that are being used, and that you get a sense sometimes when you're in these discussions that the other side isn't being quite honest in how they're portraying their arguments. Maybe they're cherry picking, maybe they're using certain tactics to highlight the bad and downplay
they're
the
using
good.
tactics. Okay, what you can feel when you're on the receiving end of the behavior that you cannot ferret out from just reading the interchange is that you can tell when someone is playing you using a tactic that's totally false tactic and not organic to the moment and not trying to have a real conversation. You can catch it immediately. 2 tweets in and you'll know this guy's playing you. but you can't necessarily pick it up from the outside because some of those arguments are real arguments in the community at large. Does that make sense, what I just said?
No, it does make sense, but what I would suggest is if you put yourself in the shoes of the other person, how do they see me? If they really do see me as
Oh, wait, I got to answer this to
Sorry.
my wife.
Yeah,
Hold on.
sure.
Hold on.
Go
John,
ahead.
want to take over for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Continue on what you were saying there, Brett.
Sure. So if you see the other person as a nefarious type of person, you know, that you distrust them, you think that they're manipulative, you think that they're out for no good, and you think they're evil, for want of a better word. If you really think that they're bad in some way, you are going to interpret their actions and their statements with that filter over it. Now, they may on their side think you're the one who's bad and that they are just being strong. So what you see is nefarious tactics. They see telling the hard truth or fighting for the good and the just on their side. And it's just, I see so often, and that people can identify the negative tactic in the other side, but they don't spot it in themselves. And so you will often have each side criticizing the other, almost using the same language in exactly the same way. And I see this, I mean, it's so often, it just happens over and over and over again. And it leads, and for me, I've often talked to some of these people, beside, on the side or whatnot. And so I can have a productive conversation with them, where they've had a terrible conversation with someone else. But, I've been able to talk to them and I know a bit of what's behind what they're saying. And again, usually they're in much better faith than you would think. By good faith, meaning that they're presenting their honest opinion. They really are they really do think they're doing something good, that when they're, even if they're unconsciously manipulative, and I agree, people do that. I mean, people, I think, do use sort of tactics, and people cherry pick, but people don't always cherry pick as a deliberate tactic. They often cherry pick out of cognitive bias, that they remember the parts that they lean on the parts that favor their argument, and they sort of forget about, they put aside the parts that don't favor them. And it's not good that they're doing it, but it's often bias more than bad faith.
Right. So do you have like a tactic, I guess, in recognizing the kind of biases that you're putting into practice on your own side, or like how to work around these types of biases that we have, especially regarding these conversations?
Well, one of the top ones, I think, is to repeat back to the person. Let me just try to understand what you're saying. So are you saying this? Is this what you're trying to say? Not coming in with some attack. So you start off by saying, I want to understand you. I want to understand I'm just trying to, first, before I respond to your position, I just want to understand, is this what you're saying? And then you can go further. Is this the implication of what you're saying? And it tends to calm people down. Like, you can see conversations start off very tense, and then when you start doing that, they relax a little bit. And you can get into more, but it's hard. I mean, and some people won't be up for it, for sure. I mean, there are certain people who you have to just say, like, I will say sometimes, listen, I want to have a good productive discussion, but I'm not going to have a discussion with you if you're just shooting insults. I mean, I'm just not up for that. I'm not interested in that. I don't block anyone. My block list is empty. My mute list is empty. But there are people who I will say, I'm willing to engage with you if you want to have a productive discussion. But if you're not going to try to listen, if you're not going to try to have a good productive back and forth, then I'm just not interested in doing it. I don't say you're an idiot, or, I mean, so here's part of the thing. We can talk about tone. A lot of people say, oh, we don't want to tone police. People should just listen to my words and respond there. But the fact is, people aren't made that way. And when you insult somebody, say, you automatically engage their emotions. You're engaging an emotional response. They're no longer responding to you using pure reason. You're making them mad, and they're going to respond in kind. and then they'll respond back with something nasty, and then suddenly you're in this cycle of crap. So the part of it, and it's hard, you have to work at it, is trying to keep a tone, and I call it a civil tone. It's not about being nice, although it sort of works with being nice, but it's about communicating in a way you don't want to raise the person's tribal biases or biases against you. When you insult somebody, when you call somebody an idiot, it takes the focus away from the content of what you're saying, and it draws the focus to the perceived insult. So they're no longer thinking of the argument, they're just thinking of the us versus them, right? And so it almost always, once you go to insults, it'd be nice to say, oh, people shouldn't, why are they such snowflakes, they should just respond to my argument. But that's not how most people aren't able to control their emotions that well.
Yeah, it's almost like you're initially drawn to, like, okay, well, now I have to go defend my honor or my character because this guy just badmouthed it, and that's kind of like a diversion tactic from the actual topic sometimes.
Right. But once you've degenerated into insults, that means the conversation has degenerated. The only thing that I'm trying to point out, and then I want to shift gears back to Viveki, and this is just something to think about. We'll talk about this when you come back on, because this is actually a good conversation. The only thing I want you to think about is that in real life, I'm great. I never get in arguments in real life. The only person I argue with in real life is my wife, and that's it. Nobody else on planet Earth. And on Twitter, I get in arguments still a little. 2 tweets in, you can tell if somebody's operating in bad faith. I'm using bad faith too generally. I agree with that. But if they're just trying to be kind of a douche and kind of not have a product, you can tell 2 tweets in usually. Doesn't take rockets.
There are those type of people too, but I guess I would call that a little bit different than bad faith necessarily. But yeah, that's something.
The agenda. What's the person's agenda? Well, see, with you, it's hard for you to imagine, or maybe it's not. Maybe that's not.
But I have a different. I have an agenda. My agenda is to try to promote good conversations.
Right.
So everybody has an agenda.
Right.
Everyone has an agenda.
What's the agenda? And you can tell if you can tell really quickly, 2 tweets in, if somebody's agenda is not to have a real conversation.
Right. But one thing we need to realize, I think, is that often people don't have good conversations because they don't know how. And so it's not that they've necessarily, first of all, there are a bunch of people who still think, the internet isn't real life. And I think we're at the stage now.
My wife calls you guys my fake friends.
Yeah, well,
that's you on with your fake friends today.
But that's the thing. So a lot of people think of the internet as fake and that it's not real. I think that's wrong. I think that we're at a stage now. When the internet started, that was probably true, but the internet is so integrated into our lives, and we have real relationships here. We have real friendships, real even between the people who don't even like each other. But you have people who argue with each other for years on the internet. These are real relationships with real people.
Yeah,
and I think part of what we need to do is start. And even though okay, I have my real name Brett, I have my moniker Pleasure of Doubt, but they're both me. Pleasure of Doubt is me, right? So it's all us. And I think a lot of people are still in the mindset of it's not really that real, and they don't realize that it could be better. And that I think if we show them that it can be better, I think I hope it's not going to be everybody, but I know a percentage are going to say, you know what, we can have more decent discussions online. And the other thing is people, you do have these cliques, and you do have, like the New Atheist, and you have these groups where people get into these styles of discussion, and they get into these ruts, and they have their talking points, and they just learn that as normal, and they haven't really thought about how their discussions are going and if they could be better. So I agree, a lot of people go in having really bad discussions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're nefarious, that they're trying to cause harm. They just may not know how to have productive conversations, and
I agree.
They end up causing harm.
I agree. Okay, let's go to John Vervaeke before we run out of time.
Sure.
Now tell us tell us what John Vervaeke is, why you're so into it, and in the most simplest language possible, what you think the meaning crisis is. Go ahead.
Sure. So John Vervaeke is a U of T prof. So he worked with Jordan Peterson, and I think of him as the good Jordan Peterson. I wish. All
right, let me just say this if we have people listening. If you like Jordan Peterson, you will like John Vervaeke, especially if you're an atheist or a secular person. Then you'll really like him, and you won't. Some of you think Jordan Peterson has baggage. Maybe from what Pleasure Doubt said, he probably thinks he does too. But if you think Jordan Peterson has baggage, this is the same type of ballpark, but without the baggage. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Atheists.
I'll say my short version on Jordan Peterson is I take him on literally a sentence by sentence basis. I mean, he says a lot of stuff that I think is wise and profound, and then in the next sentence he's right off what I would call the deep end. I think when he's talking about psychology or talking about the Bible, I think that series is great. When he gets into politics, I think it's not his forte. But so I like a lot of Peterson and I dislike a lot of it. So I take him sentence by sentence. But so yeah, John Vervaeke just focuses on the meaning aspect. At least from what I've heard, he doesn't really focus on the politics, and I think he does that on purpose. Oh, sorry, did I say U of T? Yeah, University of Toronto is where he's at. Okay, so John Vervaeke has this 50 episode YouTube series which he calls Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and it's a vast. I mean, we're not even at the end of it yet. I think I'm up to episode 38 of the 50, and really what he's done is he goes over the history of philosophy and religion, in how basically these philosophical traditions have helped people have meaning, and really it's regulating what he calls the agent arena relationship. So how we see ourselves and the world, how I see myself vis-a-vis you, how I see myself vis-a-vis the community, and you can scale up and you can scale down. So it's really how we see ourselves. And he talks about so he goes through the philosophy. So he goes through like Plato right up to the present time, and how we used to have these you call these psychotechnologies. So psychotechnology is sort of a mental so reading is a psychotechnology, a mental tool that we use to accomplish things.
Right, but it changes your relationship to the universe at large. Like reading dramatically improves your relationship to the world at large. So these psychotechnologies have really intense applications, and we've kind of just taken them for granted along the years. That's part of it too.
And so a lot of these religious traditions had these rituals, and which he calls serious play, that would be the people's ways of acting out their relationship to the world and to their God in the various traditions. And as time has gone on, we've gotten away from these rituals, and we've even religion has become more propositional and gotten away from the techniques that people have used to have meaning, to have meaning. And what he's realized that he doesn't think we can go back. So he doesn't think we can go back to a time and just sort of reestablish the role of meaning that the religions used to have. And he's proposing what he calls the religion that's not a religion. I mean, there's so much. I mean, there's 50 lectures. We're 36 in. There's so much. It's hard to sort of sum them up in a short period of time.
No, it's really hard. Yeah. I just want you to just keep in mind that there are Christians listening to this, okay, that don't know anything about them. I've been trying to get Jay from England, for example, to check them out. So there are Christians that don't know anything about them, and then you've noticed that I'm interested in as a Christian. So, you know.
I think it's something. It's a series that I think can appeal to both theists and non-theists.
That's why I like it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like I've never been quite an anti-theist, but even this series, I become even less of an anti-theist in listening to his series. He's really given me an appreciation of what, like, I've never been a very religious person, so I never was really, I've seen some of these rituals and so on, but I've never really been a big participant, and they always seemed, a little odd to me. But I have a greater appreciation for what these symbols and these rituals do. So the way I see it is that you can take the theological aspects of the religious aspect, is there God and what God wants, and of the various religions. So there's that aspect of religion. But beyond that, religions do things. They do very practical things for people in terms of building communities, in terms of helping people have a place and see their place in the world, and that helps them feel good about themselves. So religion's done a really good job with that. And frankly, I think the secular societies, and Vervaeke talks a lot about that, have done a pretty bad job. So the secularization is sort of said, okay, we don't really buy the whole God thing, but they've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. So there's a lot of rejection of everything to do with religion, whereas maybe there were some parts of religion that were very useful. And I sort of see Vervaeke as a bridge. I'm big on bridges, and I think Vervaeke provides a bridge between theists and non-theists. And
totally
frankly,
agree.
so does
Now let me ask.
Peterson. That's where I think Peterson is brilliant. I've been re-listening to his Bible series, and I think he also provides a bridge between theists and non-theists.
Yes, and we've even talked about. I don't want to sidetrack on metaphorical truth, but you pointed out that that's a really useful way for me, the Christian, and you, the atheist, to talk about the Bible, and we focus on metaphorical truths rather than is right. It true, rather than propositional. Is it? No, it isn't true, Craig. Yes, it is, baby eater. And then we get into it on zero sum. No, wait. Go ahead. I just because there's I want to steer this to a certain way. Let me see if this helps sum up at least a part of what John Vervaeke. Yes, John Vervaeke is extraordinarily complex. There's 50 videos, and he has a really deep knowledge of a lot of philosophy. Hegel, Plato, blah 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 blah. What religion provided, I think you're getting an appreciation that religion, even if you don't think it's propositionally true, it provided a community and a structure and a metaphor that gave the individual practitioner some form of ultimate meaning so that he could help transcend or solve or cope with the perennial questions. Would you say that's fair?
Sure, although Vervaeke wouldn't call it ultimate meaning, but he would probably
no, subjective to the person, not an ultimate meaning. Like to me, Craig, Jesus is providing an ultimate meaning, but you disagree because that's proposition.
Right.
But you recognize that it subjectively provides that to me.
Yeah, that religion provided the tools for people to generate meaning and insight and wisdom, and again, we can go into hours, and we have in our weekly series. We tend to spend 3 hours a night on Saturday on the weekends going through all this. So there's so much that can be said. But yeah, I think he's given religions provide the tools, the practices for people to discover their own meaning.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I mean, just to, what Vervaeke is trying to do, I think, is to take out the things that he thinks is very useful from religions and present them in a more secular way. Now, where I think this is a bridge is because, okay, so if a theist and an atheist, the theist may not be happy that the atheist or the non-theist doesn't believe the propositional aspect, but the theist can say, well, at least they appreciate this about the rituals, and at least they're looking for meaning. Because I think a lot of theists have an idea that non-theists just don't have any meaning in their lives, which I think is wrong. I think Vervaeke shows that that's wrong. Vervaeke shows that we all have meaning. We just have to sort of work at it. And so it opens up, so it opens up a way for the non-theist to appreciate what religions do beyond the stuff that they're not so crazy about, which is not to say that they suddenly say, oh, everything about religion is great, but it opens up a way to say, hey, I get it, I get what you see in it.
Right.
I
Well,
get,
that's exactly why I latched onto him, because it's a lot of it too is just language. Most of your part of what you talked about at the beginning of this conversation is zero sum conversations, a
Yeah.
winner, a loser. There's no way I, a Christian, and you, an atheist, can converse without conflict. Whereas it's really easy for me to converse with people without conflict as long as they are willing to do it. Was you minimize the zero sum aspect. So we're all both
Yep.
talking on the same page about the same thing in parts of this that you and I agree. There are parts of this that you and I agree upon and can have a productive conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, and Vervecchi is really, I think, I mean, he's opened up my eyes to that. So, I mean, it's one of the most influential series I think I've come across, and that doesn't happen very often. Where I'll listen to things and say, hey, that's really good, but this series, I think, I can't imagine that there's anyone who takes it seriously and doesn't get something out of this series.
Well, it's quasi-revolutionary in a way. In a
Yeah.
way, he's similar to Peterson, because Peterson was revolutionary too, but it's more of just, there's nothing all that exceptional about either of these two people. They just happen to have the right training and fortuitous time in the history of culture that these kind of ideas are ready to happen, or this kind of way of looking at things is ready to happen. Go ahead.
Well, also, I mean, what Vervecchi really points out is that modern science backs up that the use of a lot of these rituals, and a lot, especially things like meditation. I mean,
Totally.
he's very respectful, by the way. Like, you can tell as he's going through this that he wrestles with this. He's always saying, I want to be respectful here. He's an atheist. He doesn't believe in God. He makes that crystal clear. But he appreciates religion, and he goes out of his way to say so. And even when he's sort of promoting the religion that's not a religion or trying to change it, he always tries to say, look, I'm not trying to be offensive here. So he's really trying to toe the line. He doesn't want to offend the non-religious people. He really wants to bring them in. And I think he does show. And so what he shows is, through that modern neuroscience and cognitive science, backs up. He's probably more, he's closer to Buddhism than Christianity, but he appreciates Christianity. But things like meditation have a lot of research to it, and meditation has been demonstrated that if you have a regular practice, it modifies your brain. There's neuroplasticity. It changes the way your brain functions. And what he's also discovered, what the science has discovered, is meditation. And I think prayer is similar. And I think he said that too. But I think prayer does a similar thing. If you have a regular practice of prayer, that I think does a similar job to meditation, it opens your capacity for insight. So it's not surprising to me as a secular person that people who pray a lot have their prayers answered, because they're doing a practice that seems to be tailor-made to produce insight and to provide answers. That insight is something we can work on, that we can get better at it by following certain, as he says, psychotechnologies. He gets into a lot of, it's really interesting. Sometimes he has a lingo that it sounds so awkward to use, but he's really given a grammar for how to talk about these things related to meaning. He's developed a term called religio, which is obviously related to religion, that he basically talks, where he's taken all the spiritual mechanisms in our body. So the mechanisms in our brain and body that produce these spiritualism, he sort of grouped into this term religio. And so again, it's a language that allows secular people and theists, because he talks about a secular version.
Same language. That's exactly everything you just said is like music to my ears. And it's what I talk about on 30% of my videos. I will say, like, science is starting to back me up, and I'll point people like Deconverted Man to John Vervaeke. So far, Deconverted Man hasn't gone. He's too busy, hitting it with the honeys. But I'll point him to John Vervaeke because the science is there. He's a neuroscientist. And the people he cites if you look at all of his lectures, there's all these books that he cites, and those people probably have a lot. You know, I haven't had time to totally go into the people who he cites, but
Yeah,
go
there's
ahead.
so much. I mean, literally, it's a career's worth. I mean, every lecture, he doesn't just post articles. He says he refers to entire books. I mean, you could spend years dipping into the sources he cites, and
Yeah, totally.
there's-
But the science is backing up a lot of this is where religion and science are meeting, and it's not zero sum. I don't have to short circuit the process and make sure you and him believe in Jesus, you know,
Right.
before we get on the same page and start having a conversation that is fruitful for both of us, right?
Right, and that's why it's easy to sort of dismiss religion as mere superstition, but I think it's important to realize that religions have done way more than just uh, the tales, and even those tales. I mean, myths, and as Verbeck talks about in Peterson too, you know, these myths that, you know, or these stories, you know, I'm not saying myths in an insulting way, but the
Right.
Bible or
Myths
the
has
very
been used, but
yeah,
myths has been used by the new atheists as a pejorative. But
yeah,
if you read real, like even Karen Armstrong, they said that's not how myths have been historically understood.
right.
It's not just about what happened then; it's about what's perpetually happening in the psyche, in the human being today. It's an archetypal relationship that
Yeah, I
transcends
think
then. And
what they
is the
talk about
story
is
true?
these are stories that are sort of developed by communities that recognize certain patterns, certain useful patterns to helping these communities function. So there's no surprise that these myths come across things that are true, even if the way they describe them in a propositional way may be less so. But but these are, I mean, these are very wise people who came up with these things, and
Totally,
it doesn't mean
totally.
you have to accept it. It changes your relationship, but it also means, I mean, in a secular way, for example, I would still say it lets us pick and choose. You know, we don't have to take all of it. We can recognize certain patterns in there we don't like anymore
Well,
these
it's
days. You know,
possible that the main objection of a lot of atheists, and you pointed this out, seems to be to the fundamentalist framing.
yeah,
And fundamentalism is reactionary and defensive. It isn't forward looking and like it was even the term fundamentalist. I actually don't believe that many different things than a fundamentalist. It's just their tone and their approach is reactionary and defensive. And it was in response to a theology called liberal theology, ironically. It had nothing to do with liberals, um, wherein they tried to incorporate some of scientific truth into an honest reading of the Bible. But of course, people being people, they debatably went too far. You know, so they started. If everything is up for grabs, then let's throw out everything, and everything is allegorical. And I think that made sense. Tell me if that made sense. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. We have to remember the new atheism movement grew out of the rubble of 9/11, right?
It
That's
did?
really, yeah. I mean, like
I didn't know that.
Sam
Weird.
Harris talks about 9/11 being his impetus for writing The End of Faith. So,
How
which
strange is that?
yeah,
Weird.
so it was a time where the dangers of religion really hit hard, right? Because obviously these religious fundamentalists,
I wasn't even connecting it to religious fanatics. Okay. I was
yeah.
like, God, it's
So
so weird. I didn't even consider, like, wasn't even thinking of it in terms of, oh, yeah, those were religious guys who blew up the building. I wasn't, never
right,
mind. Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, look, I mean, listen, if there weren't religious people out there who were imposing their views, the new atheist movement probably wouldn't have formed. I mean, they're the ones who get the most of the attention because they're the ones who are, if everybody was just minding their own business and just, doing their own rituals, but not trying to push it on other people, that, there wouldn't need to be a movement. Like, that movement wouldn't have arose. But that's why those are the people, the fundamentalists, and the people who are trying to push that, as you call it, an agenda, in terms of public policy. They're the ones that get the most attention from the new atheists. They're not really as concerned with the people who are just quietly doing their own thing.
Right. But fundamentalists, just in general, are essentially reactionary and defensive. It grew out of a response to the modern world that is reactionary and defensive about, changing times and things like that. There are a
Sure.
lot of
Yeah.
there are a lot of things that social conservatives, socially conservative people believe that I totally empathize with and I get, but then there's other times where they wouldn't listen to John Vervaeke because they'd always be looking for a time to impose ideology and shut down the conversation. That's the point I'm trying to make, and that's the wrong approach. That's the only that's really the only thing about it that's potentially toxic or destructive, is that you got to let the scientist do his little science guy thing and see where it goes, and then you take it from there. You know what I'm saying? You don't try to impose your, and I think this is even what Jesus teaches, but, or at least even, well, go ahead.
Well, so, like the Vervaeke method of Vervaeke respects these myths and what these myths do, and he notes that the role of story, of narrative in meaning is important. Narrative is how we convey meaning, right? These myths are sort of meaning, meaning mechanism, meaning propagators, right? They're how we spread these messages. Now, with Vervaeke, though, his approach would be different myths can do a similar role. So it opens up to a more open, that we don't, if you're a Christian, you can appreciate what Christianity does to you, but Buddhism and even Islam, they do similar things for their people. And what Vervaeke wants to do is get away from, again, the metaphysical truth of it, the propositional truth of it, and look at what these stories do, and that is a positive in terms of different people not hating each other because they have different beliefs.
Yes, I agree.
So I mean, and there's so much we can go into. Vervaeke talks about just this. A lot of it is scientific, but he does it in a pretty lay friendly way. He talks about, he really lets you get into the science of how things become salient to us, and how we go about sizing up the world. And he talks about scaling up and scaling down, and the object of using these psychotechnologies like meditation and contemplation and is to get a better optimal grip on the world. So if you have like a pen or pencil crayon, and if you lay it out too far, you can barely see it. But if you bring it in too close, it's blurry and out of focus. But if you just hold it at that sort of optimal space from your eyes, you can see it and in all the detail and the salient details. And what these technologies do is help you ostensibly, because I mean I'm hoping I've meditated a little bit, but not nearly enough to do what to really get the benefits. But if he's right, by having these practices, you get better at seeing the world. And that is something that we can appreciate no matter what our theological background, that we can borrow from. I mean, again, I talked about prayer being a type of meditation, but even if practices like meditation probably benefit anyone from any point of view, whether they're secular, whether they're religious.
Right. Well, there's the science knows that there are physiological health benefits, mental benefits from prayer, from meditation, that's being practiced in a way practiced in a correct way. There are benefits that people have. And what all he's doing is having the science meet religion. Now, he's doing it the only way that he can do it, which is from secular first. There's no good reason on earth why Christians can't lay a hold of what he's doing,
right,
and then
exactly
use it for backing up some. That's why I listen to him, to use some of what he's doing as tools to aid for what I'm doing. There's no good reason. A lot of this is language. A lot of it is language, is learning how to talk to different types of people and speaking language that people understand and naturally latch onto. It's in a lot of ways, it's more important than that. It's the most important aspect of it, because that's where the conflict come from. You say buzzwords and that sets off tribal instincts. Buzzwords and that says, oh, he's of my tribe. And people don't know that they're automatically, I think a good person you should talk to, Paul Vanderklay. You should try to set up a sit down with him, because that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I've listened to him quite a bit, and I've talked with some people in his community. So I don't know why my glasses are still fogging up. That is
because you're crying. You're moved by the beautiful conversation. You're having a moment. That happens. A lot of people cry on my channel.
But I like Paul Vanderklay, and I think he's similar to you. I like what I've heard from you too. That I think you're both, obviously you're Christian. You're both like he's a minister.
He's an actual preacher though. So he shifts gears from this sort of, he'll do exactly what I do. He'll have a conversation with someone like you and deliberately talk in more secular, more theoretical, more philosophical, and then go and he'll do his Christian preaching. And I'm assuming his preaching is pretty standard preaching. I don't know that. I've never really listened to this, but I assume it's pretty much like, Jesus loved you, died for your sins type of preaching, I think. Go ahead.
But he's also, but I think both of you are open to discussions with non-religious people, and you talk to us respectfully, and you want to have, you want the bridge as well. And I appreciate that. And I think the more of this that we can do, the better. And I think people just get so caught up in their us versus them, that when they find, these conversations between people with these different views, and they see that they go well, I think at least for a certain segment of the population, it appeals to them, and it's necessary, because the us versus them is that's how, it's destroying us, really.
Yeah, totally.
It's
to a certain type of person, it's like, hallelujah, this is exactly what I was looking for. And that's why Jordan Peterson struck a nerve immediately, because if you go look at his comments, most of 50% of the people commenting on his videos are atheists or former atheists, or this helped me get back into church, or aspects of church that I now am down with, or something like that. It speaks, a lot of it is language. A lot of it is, people talking secular language. And we're John, do you have questions? Is anyone watching? Does anyone have questions of the audience?
Yeah, we've got quite a few people in the chat. They've all been interacting with each other. Like
this has been a killer conversation. This is exactly this conversation.
Yeah, this has been great. Yeah, we've had Susan in chat, also Gavin.
Hey guys.
Oh yeah, Gavin's awesome. Susan's great too.
Susan, and Nathaniel J. Franco. Oh really?
Yes. I'm trying.
You'll have to practice with her at some point.
Yeah. Kann ich bitte Abend? Go ahead. Are there questions for our guest here?
Not yet. There's one thing I wanted to get into with Brett, is like if he could kind of give the rundown for what he's kind of like planning on doing with his channel, what he wants to be doing, so that anybody that's interested from this interview can go down in the description below and go subscribe to him.
Sure. Thanks, John. I have a relatively new channel. There aren't that many. I only have about 4 or 5 videos up now, and actually John's been in several of them. We've had some really actually surprisingly good discussions on free will and determinism. So there's a bunch of things that I want to try to do with this channel. One of them is to really have these conversations between people with divergent views and slow them down. For example, we've had now 3 different streams on determinism and free will, and on the 3rd stream, there are a few other people involved too, we got to a point where we actually had some agreement that it was more than 6 hours of combined conversation, and at the end we suddenly realized we'd agreed on a major point where we had been divergent for the entire time. And it was sort of an amazing experience, because most of the time when people have even productive discussions on the net, people try to, they'll have debates, or they try to fit it in to they try to fit it into an hour or 2 hours, and really to work through difficulties, to work through differences in opinions, you really have to slow things down, and you really have to spend some time going into the areas where you disagree and dig into them. People, it can take repetition. People don't like repetition, and sometimes I see people get to the point where they say, let's agree to disagree within minutes of starting a conversation, or within a very short period of time. And what we've done on my channel is really slow things down, work through the areas where, not just very quickly say, okay, let's agree to disagree, listen to each other. We do a lot of steel manning where we're saying, here's what I hear you saying, and figuring out the areas where we agree and the areas where we disagree. And then we've actually found we've been able to make some movement. So that's been fantastic. But the other things that I want to get into on my channel is getting into one thing I want to do is find people who are willing to let me moderate discussions where they've had a bit of a beef. It can be personal, it can be philosophical, but where they've had conversations that have failed, and where they've just devolved into dumpster fires. And I think I have ways of trying to help people. We talked a little bit about it tonight, but ways to try to help people burst through those roadblocks. So I put feelers out, and I haven't had I haven't had people sort of agree to this yet, but I'm hoping to sort of get these kind of discussions where we slow it down, where we really try to have each party put themselves in the other side's shoes, and really try to understand the other side, and hopefully make progress. I want to do segments where I'm going to probably call argument autopsy, where I take an exchange that failed and dissect why I think it broke down and how things could have gone better. Now, I'm not just talking about argument structure. I'm not even really talking about that at all. I'm talking about where the way the people went about the discussion, where the way they interacted with each other prevented the productive discussion, and how I think this discussion could have gone differently. And then I'll probably do. Sorry, go ahead.
Like what? Do you have any examples you can think of?
Well, yeah, actually, Craig, I don't know if you remember. I had actually asked you. I had actually.
Yes, I was really uneasy. Are you suggesting? Do you notice I never answered that?
I did notice that.
I don't know if I want you to do that, because that really wasn't how I interact. I put out 2 videos on it, and that's I don't think that's an example of how I operate at all.
No, but I think it actually, in this, we don't have to go into it now, but I think it was a situation where exactly I've seen where each side saw the other in the same way. Like each side, you saw them as the ones in bad faith and, using tricks and so on, and they saw you that way. And to me, it was actually a great example of what I've talked about, where each side.
But the difference is, without going into it, the difference is I saw them that way because of their behavior, not because they were atheists. They saw me that way because I was Christian, and they didn't look at any evidence to point out that they were wrong. They didn't look at I got interviews with some of the biggest atheists here, and not a single one of them ever listened to any of them. So they were scamming me, and they were playing me, and I will stand by that. So they were to blame. I have cool interactions with almost everybody, and that's usually atheists too.
So to be clear, my goal in these is to not focus on blame at all, because I don't really care about blame. Okay. Most of the time in these kind of discussions, it's each side contributes. It's just like with anything. My goal in doing something like argument autopsy is not to say it's this person's fault and that person's fault, because first of all, I'll almost always take probably cases where I think it's both people's fault. But the goal is to make the next discussion better, right? The goal is not to say this is the person who we should blame here, but here's where things got off. And here's the pattern that the discussion devolved into.
All right. So in that particular one, what would you, in brief, because I don't want to we're almost running out of time, but in that
Sure.
particular one, what you've thought about it a little, what were your observations?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's been a couple weeks now, and I didn't review it just
All
before.
right, we don't
now.
have to talk about it if you don't want.
Yeah, but no, but what I mean, I remember that there was an exchange where they were both both of you, I think, had some legitimate beefs with the other, but you like there was one part where you had responded a little testily to an atheist, and I didn't think it was that big a deal what you said. But then you had made a comment. I guess you had made a comment saying, "Oh, I never respond testily," and then so they say, "Well, how about this? How about this situation?" Where so they've sort of latched on to a situation where that may have been atypical for you, and sort of blowing
Right,
it up.
that's scam
so-
artistry.
Yeah, but
That's
I don't
exactly my.
okay.
But
So
okay, that's
you
exactly
say
my
it's
point.
scam artistry.
Because if
But
you're
I
on the
said-
receiving end of that behavior, think about how flagrantly dishonest this is. I have
How it seems dishonest.
Wait, no,
Yeah.
wait. In this particular thing, it's totally dishonest. Let me back my case up.
Yeah.
I have interactions. Drew, genetically modified skeptic, objectively Dan, Apologia. These are like the movers and the shakers of the atheist community. I invite them on my channel. There's not 1 ounce of conflict. I don't conflict with them at all. I was on
Yeah.
somebody else's territory, and they were starting fights with me, and I fight back a little, and it's the one public conflict I get. He posts it, and this guy's going like, "Oh yeah, really? Like, oh, you're real non-combative." I mean, it's like mind-boggling.
Yeah, so
how dishonest that is.
and
I
actually,
wanted to kill that guy. I
yeah,
swear to God, I
it was
wanted
kind
to
of
kill him.
and it was kind
It
of
was
silly.
so
And
dishonest.
I know you got a little test, and you got a little testier, and then
Oh
things
man,
got
I
up.
wasn't
But
testing. I was furious.
Yeah.
I was ready to burn that guy. I was ready to him. I
Yeah.
got more mad at
But-
because that was so unrighteous.
but you know about confirmation bias, right? Where you remember the hits and you forget the misses.
Right, but then I
Because-
called him on it, and he wasn't even willing. He didn't back down. He doubled down. See,
Right, but that's the nature of bias. Bias isn't easy.
no.
This
But
is
wait,
one
but
thing
wait.
we have to remember.
Here's something. You gotta learn. And then you'll get this right. If somebody is acting in bad faith, okay, sometimes they're doing it accidentally. I can really pull back. I can. I'll offer somebody either a punch or an olive branch, and the punch is usually a pulled punch. Okay, so I'm punching them slightly so that they kind of get that I'm miffed, which I did to him. I
Mhm.
was about to say, "Hey, asshole, listen." I was really going to lay into him because it was so unrighteous. So I offered him a little punch, and he doubled down. He said he accused me of using the word slander as a legal term when everyone knows as a colloquial term. And then
okay, but there you
he
go.
didn't
See,
back away from the conflict
Right.
and say, "I see." He kept going as if he was right. Then then it's all. There are sometimes an instigator in a conflict and a problem person in a conflict, and
Yeah.
and
Well, this is why I
and
wanted
there
to
can
do
be a Christian or an
the
atheist.
video
It has
because
nothing to
because
do with
there were phrases on both sides that I think could have triggered sort of those emotional reactions. I don't remember the exact examples off the top of my head, but I remember noting them
right,
at the
but
time.
he wasn't willing to look at any of my videos and go,
Okay.
"Oh wow, you really aren't combative." He wasn't.
But do you think he was doing that deliberately as a like where he was like, "Oh, I know he really isn't like this," but I just want to make people believe it. Do
No,
you think
but
that's what he was doing?
why did you, but he wasn't willing to back away and go, "Oh, okay." And even if he had done it haltingly, he doubled down and said, "Look,
Right.
you're using
Yeah.
slander wrong. It's not." He pretended that slander was a legal definition, and then he doubled down on the conflict and said it again. In other words,
But maybe
the bad
he
faith
was
isn't-
focused. So there's so many in this, but like the slander thing, you present it as he knows darn well I meant it in the colloquial way, and he's being dishonest in how he's
smart
presenting
enough.
it.
Okay, wait,
Yeah.
no. This is where you can't be. If you're doing your project, and I respect your project, I think it's right. You can't be dense with people. That guy is 100% smart enough to know that there's a colloquial definition of slander, and I used it in a colloquial way. He was playing me.
But have
That's
you
why
ever been? I know I've done this. I've sometimes been stuck in an argument where someone calls me on something, And I know there's something in the back of my mind where I know they're kind of right, but there's something in me at that time where I sort of, like you say, double down, where I can't recognize it. I don't know if you've had that, but I know I've
Yes.
had
Okay.
that, and I've
He
had to
might have
fight
done
that in
that.
myself.
Okay. I'll give him that. You notice I never followed through on the quarrel, and he's never come back, and I've never. He might have done that. I will let somebody go if they're. Sometimes you just get into a quarrel and you can't back out gracefully because you want to save face, so you just keep going.
Yeah.
He might not be. I'm not saying he's a douchebag or he's a bad guy. I'm saying he acted in bad faith in that situation and didn't extract himself and walk away. But
Yeah, I would just use the word biased there rather than bad faith. I mean, I
that's
could
fine.
definitely see bias.
That's fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's totally fair. I'm not that particular one really bothered me because I have a track record and I didn't build up the track record for no reason so that someone can just casually pretend it doesn't exist in public. In public, if he did that to me privately, it wouldn't bother me. Remember, it's public.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
no,
he's
I- no, I-
accusing
no, I
me
get it.
of being the combative one between me and Peter. Are you kidding? Look at his track record. He gets a fight with every single person he interviews, every single solitary one.
Yeah.
And he's accusing me of being the
And I
combative
will
one between me and
guarantee
Peter.
you.
I'm like,
here's
oh my
what- Here's
God.
what I'm willing to bet. I'm willing to bet he sees it not as combative on Peter, on Peter's side, but
Is
as
fighting for the team.
yes, fight not for the team, for the good and the just.
Right,
Like
right.
the,
Okay.
and versus when you do it, oh,
Right.
you're being
Okay.
unreasonably combative. You see?
Excellent point. Excellent point. Excellent point. I totally and 100% agree with you. Yes, that's where you might actually be really good at this because I totally agree. He didn't see, even in that altercation with me and Peter, as Peter being combative. He saw it as Peter cornered the Christian doesn't like it, but Peter was right. So he saw it through a totally different lens that has a whole history behind it. I agree with you. Very astute.
And it's hard in the middle of a conversation to take a step back and do it. Like I think I'm better at it than most people, but it's not because it's because I've worked at it for a really long time. So I've trained myself.
No,
but
it's impossible.
And even
it's not
I
hard.
get into
it's
these
not
cases.
Hard. It's impossible. Once you have a certain trigger mechanism, I'm really pretty easygoing, really am. But you can tell in this conversation, once that trigger gets triggered, your alarm bells are off and it's hard to put it back. It's really hard to put it back.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a certain type of person who knows how to push those buttons, and that's all they're trying to do. They're saying inflammatory things to get you to respond like that. They usually stay calm in the altercation, if you notice, and they'll even point out how calm they are, but they're the one doing the inflamming. They're the ones saying the outrageous inflammatory things, and it's a style, and it's a style of confrontation that's deeply street. My wife does it. My wife is great at it, by the way. Great at it. Like, you can't win an argument with my wife. I swear to God, you can't. You can't. But she enlists like the help of the neighbors in the quarrel. And it puts you all of a sudden you're defending your character against the neighborhood. She goes, everyone in the neighborhood knows you do. They're like, what on earth? And you're like, you're reeling emotionally because that's her style, because she's fighting too hard. She's fighting too intensely. Every fight for her, because of how she was raised, is hell or high water. Win, or
Yeah, and that's why one strategy I try to do at the start of a conversation is say, like, this is what we did with the free will conversation, is say, let's not have a debate. We're going to have a discussion. Let's try to work through it together. So one thing I've said is, for example, it's easy to spot the biases in the other person, but it's really hard to spot in yourself. But that goes for the other person too. So if both parties can say, let's work together to help spot each other's biases, let's work together to push each other and ourselves. Rather than take a debate position on this topic, which once you take a debate position, you're biasing yourself in favor of your position, because you're sort of, you latch on to your position. But if you say, let's just take all our arguments and explore them and just push them and challenge them, that's where you can start to suddenly change your own view and other people's views.
Right, but I don't think people want to do that. That's the only problem with what it's
a lot of people don't, but some people do.
But I don't really think that's what people are ultimately about. In order to get somebody to really change their mind, you kind of have to be an expert on psychology. You kind of have to cajole, punch. You have to be able to do work on 4 different levels, like cajole, punch, slightly, slightly hit somebody, shake them up a little, confront, pull back. Because people don't want to change their
really uncomfortable
mind.
It's really uncomfortable. And so again, part of it is it's working together to help us all control our biases, because I'm as biased as anyone else. Bias is part of human nature. We are biased people.
Agreed.
And so it's, how do we figure out ways to control for it? How do we figure out ways to help each other get around our own biases? And it's not easy. Again, it's not easy, but I think it can be done. And I don't think everybody has to do it. But I think what I'd like to do is find, the people who do want to do it, who do want to work on that. And maybe they can be an example for the other people. And maybe then it can sort of trickle down. Right. But I'm not even trying to think in terms of change the world or anything. I'm just trying to change the people, around me.
Right. But I totally get your point about the bad faith and why you object to the word, because the atheists, even in that altercation, are seeing everything through a framing device that says that I wasn't being maltreated. And yeah, they're not really perceiving it correctly, but they're kind of being honest, because they think that the person confronting me is in the right, which totally colors the whole altercation. By definition, I start out as the unreasonable one, because I'm the Christian. So by definition, and they're comparing me to behaviors of other Christian automatically, unconsciously. There's a lot. I mean, you're actually pretty perceptive about this. So
good. And then you can think, how does it change my perception of them once I see it in that way? And you realize that it can have it can have I don't know, what am I thinking of? Like a domino effect, where you start thinking, okay, now it changes my opinion now of what they said there and there and there. And suddenly you're seeing them again. You've seen them a little bit more like you. They're a little bit more like you, not a lot maybe, but a little bit more. You recognize, what? They did mean well there, even though if I think they did in a really crummy way, but they may not have been as bad as I thought. And that changes the perception. And suddenly it opens up the way for more conversation and better conversation.
Right. And also, the other thing in what we just talked about is that once a certain threshold, the nanny poo poo trigger has been crossed, you usually can't go back. So I've noticed that you got to just disengage at that. I've noticed that with my wife. Once we get into the heated part, there's almost no pulling back from that, except you say some painful things you don't mean, you try to hurt, then you draw back and you regroup and you start calming down. But once that threshold, the alarm bells have gone off and you're primed up, because then you're primed to fight. You're not primed to agree or listen or hear. You're primed to fight. And if there are 5 people,
you're emotionally involved. Yeah.
But if you're 5 people around, this is why Twitter can sometimes be dangerous like that, because 5 people sets off alarm bells. That's and they're against you. That automatically makes you, you guys better be sorry you ever.
I get it. And I had a long time on Twitter too, where I was getting into these unhealthy discussions, where I was continuing discussions once the emotions were already heated. And then I took a 3 or 4 month break from Twitter and came back saying, okay, I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to really put the emphasis on productive discussions and the de-emphasis on just polite disengagement. So when I get the sense that we're getting to that point, I'll say something like, I'm happy to continue this, but not in this way. If you want to, great. If not, I'll just wish you well and politely, disengage. And that's been quite effective. Like, I don't think we should be rewarding the bad behavior. And sometimes it means just saying, you know what, I'm not interested in having that conversation. If you want to have another time in a more calm way.
Right. Well, that's how I avoid it on Twitter. It's actually somewhat easy. It's only if you fall into the trap, because it's hard to disengage in that 1 or 2 hours. But once that 1 or 2 hour window has passed, it's really easy to walk away from it and not give the flyingest fig what that guy thinks of me, or what, just like, oh, whatever, who cares? And not go back to it and not care. it's Twitter is good like that. You can pull out of these things and then just, you're done. Basically, it's not that relevant. Maybe 5 people saw the thing that he posted to try to publicly humiliate me with. Okay. I looked at the view account, maybe 10 people saw it. I'm like, God, who cares?
Yeah, no, I saw that it was something you had said like 3 years ago or something. I think that's silly. That, but they believe, I don't think they see it that as silly, but I think it's silly. I'd much rather
I
talk
think
about
that's
what people.
way worse than silly. But anyways, John, what are there questions? You have questions, John? Is he still here?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. No questions,
What,
but
you
I
fell
did get
asleep?
no. I got a response from Susan. She said, hold on. What did she say? She said, Nein, ich habe kein Bier here.
I don't have any beer here.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I have a kind beer here.
Yeah. And then she had to go off and make dinner. So she said, Juice, Craig.
Just ask her next time. Entschuldigung, wo kann ich bitte an Kuba Schreiber kaufen?
Okay. We'll do.
Um,
But yeah,
so-
that's it.
So this was awesome. This is exactly
Great.
how I thought this conversation was going to go. Yeah, this was
Good.
cool, man. This was great. So
Yeah.
do you
good
want to
time.
become a recurring problem on our show?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, definitely. Any conversation is good conversation. That's no, I really had a good time. I enjoyed talking to you, Craig, and you've been coming on our Verbecki talks, and I think we're going to do another one on Sunday this time. It's my son's birthday tomorrow, the one who came in, so we're not going to stream tomorrow. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed chatting with you, and yeah, definitely like to continue.
Yeah, cool. Sunday's Super Bowl, so we'll see.
Oh, yeah. Well, it'll be
yeah.
after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, so
Go
should we wrap
Chiefs.
it up, John? You have no other.
No.
insights
Yeah,
you can say?
that's it.
All right, let's shut it down. You heard it here, kids. Remember, you heard it here first. Matt Dillahunty, who? Apologia, who? Do they know anything about the meeting crisis? Probably not. Probably not. Why? Because they're not paying attention. This guy's stealing their thunder as they sleep. This guy's coming up behind them to steal their whole show. You turn around, and he's going to be the main atheist in town. You won't even know who those guys are. And he's going to be talking about how the meaning crisis is important to atheism and why every atheist needs to solve the meaning crisis. Needs to know about the meaning crisis.
That's right.
So there you have it, children. That is all for now. Should we shut it down?
Amen.
Thanks a lot.